Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. How's it going, everybody? I am here today with James Miller from Valiant Home Additions in Centerton, Arkansas. I'm super excited to have you on today, James. I know we met many years ago back at the inaugural Mile High Profit Summit. It was in like 2021. And I'll never forget, man, hearing you on stage telling your story, which was so impactful. Just kind of learning about you and just seeing all of your success. Since then has been like just such an honor to be able to kind of watch you and how you've dug out of that hole and just are thriving now. You're also a coach for the Contractor Fight. You and your wife have started your own coaching business as well. So yeah, excited to have this conversation and welcome to Builder Stories, James.
Thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure interacting with you through all these years as well.
Awesome. So why don't we kind of start us at the beginning? Like, how'd you get into construction? What led you to start Valiant? Tell us the full story, man.
I love that. So how I got started in this industry is to me is really funny. When I was graduating high school, my sister had started a business. She's 5 years older. She had started a business doing like post-construction cleanout. And I said to her, I want a job where I can get a tan. Do you know anybody? And so I literally started working I worked for a guy doing seamless aluminum gutters and vinyl siding. That started my foray into it. By the time I was 21, I was running that company. I had 30 some odd people underneath me. I was the youngest person in the company. He basically decided to go off and play and do some other things. So he paid the bills and I did everything else. And just sort of leapt off of that, started my own company, had a partner who did me dirty. So that cost me some time and energy. And that actually led me into like the actual like construction space that I'm in now. And as we've grown and tweaked and really found our niche, we've been able to accomplish some really, really cool things.
Awesome. So it was, I think you told me earlier, it was like 2011 when you started the business?
I started Valiant in 2011. Yeah.
And so what was your, kind of what was your focus at that point, and maybe what's it evolved to, since then?
Going into it, and even the years prior to 2011, right? I had a lot of that same mentality that so many new contractors do of, I got to do anything. It doesn't really matter. I got to be the best price, read cheapest, right? All those things. And I did all of those things. And I had no level of business training. I just was winging it. And then as we've grown and as I've grown, frankly, I decided to narrow the niche, which was really scary at first. Like I renamed the company, I rebranded, like everything. We completely went, okay, we do these things. And more importantly, we don't do these things. It has really rocketed what we were trying to do. I don't know if I answered your question. Sometimes I get on a tangent.
Yeah. So, I mean, hearing you say, really honing in on what your focus is, what you want to do, but also like what you don't do. So maybe give us a little bit more kind of example of, what's in scope and what's out of scope for you. And how did you decide what you shouldn't do? Because I think that's very important for people to understand. Like you can't be everything, can't do everything for everyone. Really kind of narrowing your focus is very important.
In fact, just at the recent job trade conference, there were a lot of, like most of the contractors that are like, we work for a high-end client, right? Like that's a common refrain. But early on, as I was doing that, I mean, I was working for anyone that said they could pay me. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But basically, as I developed and grew and we did our work, I started to realize that what I really, really, really loved was the transformation that takes place. So our main focus is whole house remodels and residential additions that look like they belong, that flow, all the things. And I just got really, really passionate about that. In fact, the common refrain that I heard from people was, we love our house, we love our neighborhood, we love our neighbors. If we could just fix this one thing, right? And so I got very, very good at fixing that one thing. I got very, very good at like designing these spaces. I tell people all the time, like I think in 3D, I can literally kind of see and feel what will look like complete. The biggest challenge then for me is letting my clients see what I already see. So the more that we've narrowed that focus, the more that I've said, you know what, I don't want to do that. Like, you call me to install a toilet, I'm not your guy. You call me to re-side a house, I'm not your guy. Will I install toilets and do siding? Absolutely, as long as it's, within the niche of what we're doing. And so it really just came down to, hearing from coaches, hey, you can't be everything for everyone, right? And then secondarily, like being willing to face the scary of telling people no. Like I can't even express to you how scary that was the first few times I did it. Now it's gotten super comfortable because I've seen the results of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your team look like today? Kind of how, kind of size wise, how is it structured, things like that?
So I currently have 9 employees, 6 in the leadership team and 3 in the field. That's a recent change. I had 8 running most of this year. Several of them moved, like literally 2 or 3 of them moved states, and it was none of it was related, but 5 left. I'd already been experimenting with a sub-only model, and so I've intentionally not increased the field crew size as I sort of explore this. As you referenced, right? I went into a lot of debt. I've gotten out of a lot of debt. There's still some to go, but I've made really good strides with that. But one of the, as I look through the company, I'm like, okay, where are weak points? Where do we need to show up in a different way? One of the ways was we had to increase production, and it wasn't happening in-house. And so I sort of I got a bunch of stuff in motion with that. But that's currently what I've got. 9 full-time. The guy that's been with me the longest has been with me since 2011. I've got another one that's been with me for a decade, and a couple that have been with me like 4 or 5 years. So I guess what I'll say is this: it sounds a little cocky, but the evidence would suggest that I've created a decent place to work and a pretty decent culture.
Now, well, I would say, from a third-party perspective looking in, I can sure agree that that's certainly what it looks like. I mean, again, to kind of dig into your story here in just a bit, but so with those guys in the field now, are they like actual kind of swinging the hammer, doing the construction, or are they more the project managers or field superintendents? Kind of who manages the your projects on a day-to-day basis?
So I have 2 project managers. One of them is, actually both of them are fairly recent additions. Some of that turnover that I had was a former project manager. One of the project managers is my oldest son, which was never anticipated, but one of my other employees suggested it, and we had lots of conversations, and I've been really impressed as he stepped into that role. He's young, he's 24, recently married, but has been stellar in that role. So the project managers kind of manage the projects. They typically will manage 3 to 4 concurrently. And then the field crew, they're wearing the tool belts and the hammers. They're mostly carpenters. But of course, with this sort of work, occasionally they're moving a little plumbing or disconnecting electrical or something like that to enable us to do the other things.
Yeah. And so 3 to 4 concurrent jobs, is that like per project manager? Or how many jobs are you running at one time now with the company as a whole?
3 to 4 concurrently is what's current for the project managers. We just wrapped 2 or 3 projects. And so going into 2024, within 2 months, I will probably have 6 to 8 running concurrently.
Okay, great. And who is focused on sales in your team? Is that you? Is that you have salespeople?
Just me.
Okay.
Yeah, just me.
So you're selling every job?
I have it. Yep.
And how was how, and obviously I know you're part of the contractor fight battleground coaching there. I mean, how has your sales process evolved from the very beginning? What did you used to do? What was working, not working, and kind of how have you made that transition to where you're at today?
Yeah. Well, and truthfully, and I mean, you mentioned I can't really talk about that without talking about what I've gotten from the contractor fight, right? And specifically, the first program that I joined was called the Contractor Sales Academy, and that's morphed into Battleground at this point, along with other things. But I remember, and this was several years ago. This was back in, gosh, this would have been in late 2018, early 2019. I remember so many times I would come home and I would tell my spouse, "Oh my gosh, you'll never believe, like, this job, we're going to get this job. It's going to be great." Right. And I would be on what Tom calls Hope Island. "Oh my gosh, this job is going to be awesome. It's ours." And I was doing the thing. I was in the backyards. I was telling them how great we were. I was doing all those things. Right. And I just remember one after another didn't come through. Right. And I'm just sitting there going, what is happening? Like, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've been really good. And so what I decided was my previous sales training was like 25 years old. My old boss at the guttering company, like, actually sent me to training and stuff. That was pretty cool of him. Right. But I started looking I need to update the way that I sell. And so, of course, I dove into Shenfu. Within a year, I was a third-degree black belt, which doesn't mean anything to anybody that doesn't know what that means, but pretty high echelon there. And it really, what it did, Eric, was it completely changed the way that I communicate. And not just in sales, but in every single relationship that I have. And so, like, I'll give you an example. I had a call today with a prospect about a potential project. And the majority of that conversation was actually about her teenage kids' shoes in the foyer that you're having to kick out of the way in the dirty bedrooms and the emotional meltdown, but they had nowhere to go. So they were in the only family bathroom having an emotional meltdown, right? And as a parent with 2 adult children and a 15-year-old, I've traveled that path, right? And so literally the majority of our conversation was just commiserating together about the fun that comes with raising preteens and teens and things like that. And, it was really funny when she first got on the phone with me. I asked a couple of questions and she said, "Well, let me have your spiel." Right. And I said, "I haven't heard that in a long time." I said, "In fact, I have to tell you, there isn't a spiel. I don't have one. My goal is to have a conversation, make a connection, and see if I can help you. That's it. That's the only thing." And so I went from a place of desperation, gonna close this job, to now my goal when I get on a sales call is literally just, can I make a human connection with another human in a way that's meaningful? And if we happen to get work out of it, how freaking awesome is that?
Yeah. Awesome, man. I mean, having that genuine concern and having that come across. I mean, again, at the end of the day, like, people want to work with people that they trust, they like, they believe, have their best interest in them. And, you're clearly showing that.
Thank you.
So I'm curious. So, again, you kind of alluded to it earlier. And again, my first, experience meeting you was, when you're on stage, talking about this mountain of debt that, that you had holding over your head, and, that it was just a huge weight on you. I mean, can you maybe kind of just tell us a little bit more about kind of, how did you get into that? Was that, business related, personal related? Like, how did you accumulate the debt? And then, what steps, have you taken since then? And kind of how have you been able to work your way, out of it or almost out of it, because it's incredible to see the success that you've had. And I mean, I could feel, the emotion and how hard it was on you, and just that came through to all of us, like, and it's just, man, like, we've all been like rooting for you and cheering for you. So maybe you can share that story a little bit with us here.
Yeah, totally. One of my favorite memories about that early on was there was a guy who was part of TCF programs. His name is Tim Milner. And I first met him at a live event in December of 2019. And he's told me so many times since then, he'll say, "Man, I did not think you were going to make it. Like, I thought you were done." Right. So the broad picture, the 30,000 foot view is I managed to put the company $1.5 million in debt. And none of that debt was secured. None of it was asset based. It was all no, what's the word I'm looking for? Unsecured loans, unsecured debt at high interest. So how that happened, so it started with, I got an opportunity to build or to remodel a historic home in Bentonville, Arkansas. It actually was the very first operating, added on to the back of the house was the very first operating room in this county. I got an opportunity to bid on that project, and it was one of those that I came home, oh my gosh, we're going to get this. It's going to be so great. I was bidding against someone who now has a television show based out of this area on HGTV, right?
Yeah.
And so the clients called me back and they said, hey, we got to go with them. They're going to give us a bunch of stuff. Okay, I get it. A year later, my phone rings and it was them. Hey, our house was too big. We've been backburnered. Could we talk to you about it? And I was so excited about this vanity project because the location, everything else, like that project was like, oh my gosh, this will rocket my business to the next level, right? That was the feel behind it. What did that mean? Well, it meant that I was so excited that I didn't actually pay attention. So I had a really poorly written contract that didn't have a clear scope of work. I mean, stuff like build this as per discussions, right? I mean, really atrocious, really atrocious.
Oh, man.
So that is what started the spiral. I had charged them $500,000 for that job, thereabouts. It cost me $850,000 to produce it. So there was my first $350,000 loss. I ended up having to pay them back $65,000 for stuff we hadn't done. So at that point, I paid over $400,000 to do this job, right? I had another one at the same time that I lost like $120,000 on. And so I'm sitting here looking at, $500,000 in debt. And I was taking the quickie loans and those kinds of things, daily payments, like all the things. And then my right-hand guy said, James, I'm really stressed. I need a day off. At the time, he was one of my project managers. He's now our senior performer, but he said, I need a day off. He took 7 weeks and he was on salary. So I was paying him the whole time and the whole thing just went south. His 7-week absence cost us another $300,000. Like it was insane. And so how did I get out of it? Was sheer dogged determination. And, they say courage and stupidity look a lot alike. I'll let you decide which it was. But ultimately, I remember the first time that I realized just how deep a hole it was. And my wife is a spreadsheet whiz. And so she was showing some of that stuff to me. And like head hung, depression, like all the things, right? And that sat with me for about 2 days. And then I literally went, okay, I know what I got to do. Right. And I can't really explain where that drive comes from, except that I had an extremely abusive childhood growing up, which I've mentioned. And something about that gave me the fortitude to look that in the eye and go, well, hell, I've faced worse than this. And so I just put my head down. And one of the things I did, in fact, because it's so easy when you get in a position like that, it's so easy to get tunnel vision, right? And just be like, oh, got to get out of debt, got to get out of debt. And I started to realize that the more I was doing that, the more I was in scarcity mindset. And so on the advice of a different coach, we actually started a big picture meeting. So once a month, regardless of what's happening in the accounts, we get together and we talk about the future of Valiant. Where are we going? What are the equipment needs we have, like to plan, to dream? And doing that has actually helped because it's enabled me to take the blinders off for long enough to look up and go, what am I building here? You know what? Put this aside. This is really freaking cool. And really being focused on getting the word out. And this is a little tangent, but I'll just say this. I believe to the depths of who I am, that if you live in this area and you are planning to do an addition or a remodel, I truly believe that I owe it to you for you to know about my company. Not because you will definitely hire us, but because we are the best there is in this area at what we do, bar none. And I fully believe that. And so I also feel that it is my responsibility, my duty to get in front of those people so that they have the availability of the best option. That's also meant that even while I was paying off debt, I'm still running ads. I'm still talking about the kind of work that we do. I'm being very selective about the kind of work that I talk about. If we happen to do a job that's not in our sweet spot and not what we want to do, we don't even talk about it. We don't even show it. We just go do it. We collect the money, we do the thing. So just sheer dogged determination and
Man,
maybe a little stupidity.
It sounds like a couple really bad jobs, and just and I try to explain this to people all the time. Like, it's so important that you have a detailed scope of work and you build out a budget and you're on the same page about exactly what is going to go into it. I mean, this is case in point, James. Like, it couldn't be any more clear. Like, what can happen? Just one bad job can set you back like years and years. And I mean, it sounds like basically, you ended up with several $100,000 that, like, with high interest, and like it just starts compounding on itself over and over. And like, you didn't have much choice but to continue. Like, if you were going to get out of the job at all, you had to keep paying the guys and paying for the materials. And like, I think, again, like, more power to you, man. Like, I'm sure a lot of contractors out there who don't have, the same, ethical, kind of perspective would have just essentially just bailed on that customer and, could have just folded up and just quit. And like, but like, you kept going, and, you did what was right, and you finished the jobs, albeit in the hole, huge setbacks, and I just, man, like, again, like, it's such an incredible story, though. I mean, I've seen so many people who get in that situation and they just fold and they quit. And it's just, the end of it for them, but like, for you to have that, like, that grit and that determination to just like, okay, let's make a plan. Let's have a budget. Let's figure out how we're going to get through this together. I mean, man, it's incredible, James, that, you've been able to, like, genuinely take those hard knocks, learn from them, and then keep going and like find ways, like, thinking about the big picture. Like, I mean, yeah, like, you can't just sit there, in this spiral. And so many people I've seen, like, it's just, you're spiraling, and it feels like every day you're going deeper and deeper. It's like, you got to figure out, how are you going to get yourself out of that? And oftentimes, like, that can only come from within, whatever it is. It sounds like you had that moment that, like, okay, today is the day we're moving forward and finding ways to think and appreciate everything around you. I mean, like, that's incredible. Like, that you were able to make that transformation, and just, you ever since then been working your way out. I mean, so is it, kind of, where are we today? I mean, is it all paid off? Are you just kind of still making your way out? I mean, it sounds like you're definitely almost there, or close.
Yeah,
I think. Right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It was back in, I mentioned Stephanie, my wife, is a really great, she was like a business analyst for 20 years. Like, she knows spreadsheets in and out. And I remember back in July of 22, she put together this big spreadsheet. Here's where this debt drops off. Here's where this debt drops off. I remember looking at that spreadsheet and going, so all I have to do is what I've been doing for the last 2 years for another 6 months? Okay, cool. What was really interesting about that was when the debt was paid off, the big debt was paid off in February of 23, it didn't feel like anything. And I was really curious about that until I went back and went, oh yeah, because 6 months ago was actually when I knew that had happened, right? But so in February, the last payment was made on the biggest piece of it. That was just over $1 million that I paid off in 3 years' time. Of that, as I mentioned on stage at Mile High 23, 275,000 of that, 27.5%, was interest. Where I am currently, I have another 350 that I'm behind, but it's not the same. It's not the same type of debt. I owe a few vendors, a few things like that. I keep the lines of communication open. In fact, I've got another call to make to somebody that I owe some money to, just to say, hey, I'm working on it. Here's what I'm going to bring, those kinds of things. So we're still a little bit behind the 8 ball. If this year goes the way that I expect it to and that I believe it will, I fully expect to knock the rest of it out by the end of the year.
Man, incredible, dude. I'm so proud of you. Like seriously, like way to lead by example. Like you like seriously, like having to continue, and having that forethought that you have to keep investing in your marketing, in your advertising. Like you got to keep winning jobs. Like that's the only path forward. Your back was against the wall, but you knew that you had to keep spending money to make more money to be able to pay it off. Like I'm telling you, I can't tell you the number of people I've just seen fold their cards and they can't do it.
Totally. I've seen it too. Especially, as a coach in the contractor fight, like I've seen that. And of course, if there's ever a debt problem, who do they go to? They come to James, right? Yeah. And I literally, so every week, this is another thing we do. Every week we do a cash flow forecast. Every week we have a meeting and for about an hour, and we go over accounts payable, accounts receivable, and we're tracking and we're projecting, we're doing these things. Sometimes it's okay. Who can't we pay? Who can we pay? How can we pay them? There's all these logistics, and really what it's been, Eric, is over the last 4 years, I have changed my identity. I was a contractor. Now I am a business owner, and I operate from those spaces in an entirely different way. In fact, pretty much when people are like, what do? I will say I'm an entrepreneur that happens to operate in the contracting space, right? Because that's really who I feel I am.
Yeah. So I mean, the situation can apply to anybody in any business. I mean, again, this is a common, challenge. I mean, cash flow is one of the hardest things for, business owners to really wrap their head around and to understand. Like, even if you got $300K in the bank today, that doesn't mean that you don't owe $400K out to all of your suppliers and vendors. And, it's like people think that just because there's cash, at any moment that they're in the positive and you're not.
Yeah. They don't have free cash. They got cash. They don't have free cash. And that's a different thing. Yeah. Can I share something? Is it okay?
Yeah.
So please. I'm going to ask you a question because I remember when this epiphany happened for me and how transformative it was. So I'm going to ask you a question. Let's say that you're a contractor and you lose $1,000 on the job. Okay. Let's just make it easy. You lose $1,000. In your opinion, Eric, how much more work would you have to sell to make up for that $1,000?
How much more work?
Yeah. What would it take to undo that $1,000 loss?
Well, it depends on what my profit margin is and how much
That's
more.
true. Let's assume a 50% profit margin because that's what Contractor Fight preaches.
Well, I mean, I guess, are you wanting to break even and, essentially that next job, make that extra 1,000 to pay off the first 1,000?
I mean, right now, let me put it this way, Eric, you're asking the questions that most contractors don't ask. Okay. But I'll just share what it is. So my opinion is this: for every $1,000 you lose, you have to sell and produce $4,000 at a 50% margin in the same time frame that you would have produced the 2,000, right? Yeah. And I think that's where people don't understand, losing any amount of money on the job is it is such a big freaking hill to climb, Yeah. And so when I remember when I got to that point where I'm like, oh shit, I got a 4X in order to get back to zero or to get to where I should have been, right? Technically, I got to tell you, man, when I did that, it made me so unapologetic about my prices to my clients, completely. I'm just like, hey, I wish it could be different. This is what it is. What do you want to do? And just having that knowledge was so big for me because, again, trauma-based, all the other stuff, people would not pay me. I'd be like, okay, I probably didn't deserve to get paid, right? It was this whole thing. But once I realized every single dollar I lose, I've got to sell and produce $4, assuming a 50% margin. If I go under that margin, it's even more, right? Yeah. That for me was such a massive epiphany and such a massive realization that it's made a massive difference for me. Hopefully it will help somebody that's going to see this.
Yeah. So, I'm curious, for those out there who, I'll never forget, my dad once told me, that the number one thing that you can't do as a business owner is miss a payroll. The first time you miss a payroll, you lose your employees' trust. You're now affecting their livelihood. Like, the number one thing he always told me is just don't miss a payroll. And so I'm curious, and by the way, like in my first company, like I would have missed a payroll if it wasn't that lesson. And then I had to learn that I could, factor my receivables. So I had these contracts that I hadn't been paid on. And so I ended up having to go sell the contracts, basically to get the cash today, and then had to pay back, a fee, on top of that amount. But, from your perspective, like I'm sure you know better than everybody, like when you are in a tight cash flow situation, how do you prioritize who to pay, and how do you manage that? If it's Friday and we're trying to run payroll, but we don't have the cash to pay our guys, to pay, both our employees, our subs, our vendors, like we got, all these things to do. How have you worked through, how do you prioritize and deal with that situation?
Eric, that is such a beautiful question. And before I answer it, I'll just say I really enjoyed getting to learn more of your story from stage this time. That was cool too. So for me, and I'm just going to say it, this was also trauma informed, right? Basically for me, there was a decision matrix, and it was a few years ago that I was actually having this conversation with my wife as she came into the company. So we've been together like 21 years. She's only worked for me for the last 2. So, it's a new element to our interrelating. But I remember her saying to me, because she handles all the finances in the company now, right? And I remember her saying, James, I need to understand how you prioritize where the money goes so that I can do my job better, right? And so I shared this with her, and this will be very close to what I shared. I said, okay, first is who can hurt me or put me out of business? Like literally, that is the first. Who can hurt me or put me out of business? Second is my people. Third is materials and whatever else to keep the job going. And fourth is anything that's not those things, right? And so, even just that phrasing, anybody that can hurt me, holy crap, right? Like that comes from that. I actually revisited that today because one of the things that was forward looking is I literally just signed up with a company to do Google Ads. We have not done any paid advertising at all in really ever. We've never really done it because the resources haven't been there. But I committed to do that, and Stephanie was like, but we're behind. I don't understand how that ties into the other, right? Into that decision matrix. And so I told her, I said, okay, I feel you. And we've made enough progress that for me, as I'm looking at this, like we have cut costs as far as we can cut them, right? We cannot cost cut any further to increase our margins. There's no more room, right? So what's the way out? The way out is sales. How does that happen? Well, leads, lead flow, good leads, quality leads, all the things. And so I literally said to her, I said, okay, first is the same thing. We got to keep whoever can hurt us, whoever can like file a lien or, file suit or whatever, like those get the first priority. Second priority and second and third are now more closely aligned. What do we need to keep the project moving? So people and materials. And then third, or, second and tied for second is spending money to increase our lead flow, to increase our sales, so that that target of getting that last 350 paid off by the end of this year can happen. So for me, I literally just informed my decision-making processes by those things. And as I've gotten better, I've stepped more into an abundance decision matrix than the scarcity one that I had, but it's worked for me so far.
Man, that's so just helpful for everybody out there to think about that prioritized list and to know, because again, every business owner, you're gonna be in that situation at some point. For whatever reason, just things happen, and it could be things just, you could just have a bank error screw up somehow, and you're expecting some deposit and it just doesn't. Who knows? Whatever
Happens
it may be.
So many times. So many times.
Yeah, more times than it should in this day and age. But at the end of the day, having an ability to prioritize what are you going to do? And, I think, again, I mean, who can hurt you or put your business under, your people, the materials to keep the jobs flowing, again, investing in, sales and leads and, keeping that top of the funnel filled, everything else. I mean, like that's such a great, framework, I think, for everybody. And again, it doesn't matter if you're in debt or whatever, like even great, healthy cash flowing businesses can have those challenges. And so it's just a good, good framework, I think, for everyone. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I think too, and a really important part of this equation is when you go through that decision, or let me rephrase, when I went through that decision matrix, right? The other part of that was the commitment that I made to make the calls that were going to be the uncomfortable conversations, right? To make the call, go, listen, I know I owe you money and I cannot pay you the way that we agreed to. Here's what I think I can do. I'm going to do everything that I can to do that. I've done that now for years. And I make sure that I follow up with those people. Here's a really beautiful story around this. I have a supplier that I owe like $22,000. They've got a lumber yard. And we had this really rough spot at the tail end of last year. Cash flow was suffering. Honestly, a lot of it was kicking the can down the road and being committed to not taking more short-term loans meant that we had some struggles, right? Yeah. And like, I'm looking at it and she's going, we're going to be at grand upside down by Tuesday. I'm like, fine, but we're not taking a fucking loan. Like, it was really there. But I spoke to the manager of this lumber yard like 2 weeks ago, and he said, hey man, I called him and I said, hey, I just have a question. Like, I know that I owe you money and I might have an opportunity to like pay that off, but I need to know that if I pay it off, I can actually use the account again. Because if I can't, I've got to make a different decision, right? Yeah. And so we had that conversation, and he said, James, my boss, the owner of the company, called me this morning and he says, I don't understand why you're letting this guy skate so far, right? Like, this is literally what his boss is telling him. And this guy, his name is Brett. He says, James, I got to tell you, I told him, I know that James will pay us. It might take him a little bit, but he's going to pay us. And so I can't even tell you like how gratifying that was for me to be in that situation where I can't pay them. And yet he's advocating for me to his boss because I was brave enough, courageous enough to make sure that I kept the lines of communication open, that I communicated authentically, honestly, and just said, here's where I am. And so that's an often overlooked piece of it, because if people do not do that part, then the people that are owed money make up all kinds of stories in their head and bad things happen. So that's, for anybody that's facing that, that's a really important part of it, is to make sure that your communication skills are such and your resolve is such that you make those ugly phone calls.
Yeah, man, that is again such great advice. Like I can't tell you again, like how many times, have people just, they don't answer the call. They just ghost people. They don't, whatever it is, like they just, think that if they ignore it, it's just going to go away. And like, that's not the case. I mean, you've shown that like you've owned the mistakes that have happened. You've been open and transparent and vulnerable and said, listen, here's the situation. Like, I think being able to just, have that courage to go and have those conversations, face them face to face and tell them the situation, like you bought so much more, goodwill out of that than, the people who just don't ever deal with it and they don't answer the call. Like, I mean, it's such a great piece of advice for everyone out there. Like, just be honest with people. Like people, I genuinely want to believe that people are good by nature. And if you can help them understand the why, and it's not that you're trying to rob them or steal from them or whatever, it's, hey, I got in over my skis and like, here's the problem, but I'm working towards it. And I'm not, going to just fold it up. Like I got to work my way out of it. I think that's so important that people understand that, because again, your reputation is everything, and being able to, just do, what's right. And even if it takes you longer to do it, I mean, your case in point, a great example of that. And, and two, like I try to explain to people, even if you're not in a situation where, you may need, different payment terms. Like I encourage everybody, like really take a hard look at all of your your terms with all of your suppliers, with all of your subcontractors. Like, how are you structuring, your terms and your payouts, and like, whatever it may be. Again, if you're buying from larger distributors, lumber yards, retailers, like dealers, whoever it may be, like, at least have the conversation about, hey, could we maybe get a little bit better? If you got net 30 now, maybe ask for net 45 or net 60. Like, you never know when that might come in, into play and could help you. And it's just a conversation. If they say no, they say no. Okay, no harm, no foul. But if you can improve your cash flow situation, again, you never know when that really might help you out. So,
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah. And I remember too, like, I remember having conversations with folks, and like the realization that helped me with those conversations was it was in their best interest to work with me, right? Truly, it was. I
yeah,
literally told a couple of them that were, back when it was pretty bad. I told a couple of them, I was like, listen, you can force the issue here. You can sue me. You can do whatever you need to. I'm just here to tell you, if that's the path you take, it will take you longer to get paid. I know you want to get paid. I want to pay you. I am doing everything I can. So you can take that path. You can sue me. You can file liens. You can do whatever. But if you do, for my decision matrix, you go to the bottom of the pile, like
yeah,
truly. And so I think a lot of times when people are hiding from those collection calls, they forget that, like, it's in their best interest to talk to them. It's in their best
yeah,
interest to work with you. And you mentioned like changing payment terms and stuff. That works on the other side too, right? Tail end of 2022, I had a meeting with my accountant. We had all those losses back in 2019, and he said, "Listen, we got to bring more. You have to bring more money into the company this year, or you're going to lose like $200,000 worth of write-offs." Right?
Right.
And I was working with a coach that is helping me get to like free cash. And his suggestion was brilliant. And I acted on it. It worked really well. I went to 2 high profile clients that I had, and I said, my accountant, and these are both wealthy men, right? And I said, my accountant just told me that I have to bring in more revenue by the end of the year, or I'm going to lose a bunch of write-offs. And so I literally said, I will, and we're talking $500,000 projects here, right? I said, and they were both supposed to pay me like $100,000. I said, if you will wire me $200,000 and it shows up before January 31, 11:59 p.m. of 2022, I will knock $5,000 off your bill, right? Both of those clients did that. We put $400K in the coffers in the week between Christmas and New Year's of 2022. It enabled me to do those write-offs and enabled me to get caught up. It actually enabled me to go ahead and pay the rest of that debt off in 23 because I was able to lump sum and save like 12%. Because I called them and said, I might be able to lump sum you. If I can, what would you take? Right? So getting creative and thinking outside of the box is also a very, very good tool.
yeah. And having great, accountants and bookkeepers and financial people around you,
Yes.
again, those strategies are so critical. Like, you don't have to go at this alone. You shouldn't go at this alone. Find the partners who can help you come up with
Yeah.
those creative strategies to really maximize, your opportunities here. I mean, you save $200,000 and it cost you $10,000. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saved another 12 or 15,000 on the payoff. But yeah, it's man, I had a thought and I just lost it. It felt important, but maybe we'll come back to it.
Yeah. So, I'm also curious to learn how have you managed this, like, with your personal life and with your relationship with your wife? I mean, she sounds phenomenal to have stuck by your side and to help you out. I mean, I'm sure there are tons of people who may have, again, just bailed, but like, how I can only imagine the strain that this created on your family and the relationships there. I mean, how were you able to handle that?
The strain on their relationship was incredible and intense, and amplified by the fact that during all of this, we were both working so hard to heal from trauma, from childhood abuse. And so, yeah, the strains on the relationship were and continue to be relatively intense, no question. The way that we've approached it, and I will just say this, Stephanie has been absolutely incredible. She was one of the people that believed in me when I did not believe in myself to get me to a place where I now believe in myself. I cannot express enough how appreciative I am of the way she chose to show up for me. There's no question of that. How have we handled it, Eric? We committed to be genuine and authentic and honest with one another. We committed to stay in the relationship, to stay in the conversation, right? And so we've had to be very selective. There have been times when we've had to say, I can't have this conversation right now. I'm going to go, regulate my nervous system, and then I'm going to come back and we will have the conversation. It's been a commitment to stay in the conversation, I think, is the biggest thing. It's been a commitment to authenticity, to vulnerability. And when I say authenticity and vulnerability, Eric, I cannot express to you how much of a difference that made, number one, and how thoroughly I mean vulnerability and authenticity. Like really scary, frightening, weird shit that we've committed to share with one another. And it's been challenging, and it's been worth it.
No. Again, it takes very, very strong and committed people, with a deep love for each other to be able to weather this. I have no doubt. And, I think that, what you talked about, is such a great, lesson for everyone else. Like, you don't need to hash everything out when one person or the other is not in the right state of mind. When I first, right after my wife and I got married, or I don't remember, was it right before or right after we got married, but we ended up going to this workshop called Safe Conversations. And
Right.
What we learned is that it's so important that, if you are, have something very, very important, emotionally, somehow charged up or whatever, that it's so important that you first ask the other person, like, hey, is now a good time to have a safe conversation? And if that person says no, now is not the time, then you have to respect that. And you have to say, okay, then we'll wait until it is a time. And that, that has been something that we have always, we try to, at least. I mean, again, nobody's perfect. And those, those conversations, and usually you may know what it's about. And it's like, no, I'm not in that, in the right state of mind. Like, can we please, let's wait a little bit. Let's wait till tomorrow. And man, that is so important that, I see so many times that, again, like when you get into it and you find that, there's just these emotions and it gets heated and it just turns into fighting and arguing. Like, that is not healthy, productive communication. And I think that can be, implemented in the workplace, at home, really with anybody. It's so important to make sure that both people are in that right state of mind and ready to actively listen. And then once you get into it, it's so important that person who's listening, just very intensely listens and then repeats back, hey, here's what I heard. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? And it's just such a great way to have those really hard conversations. And after I went to that workshop, I ended up taking a bunch of my people from my first company, went to that workshop again, and we all did it, as a team, which, it's kind of, there's like a bunch of couples all around you. And then, I got a bunch of people from my office there, but it was such a great lesson in communication and how to handle those. And I encourage everybody to make sure that, coming in, heated and guns a-blazing, ready to just, tear down a house that you're so upset about something, that's not the time. Like you said, James, being able to just walk away, take a little time to yourself, regulate, figure out how can you cool down and then come back a little bit more level-headed. I mean, obviously emotions are always going to be there, but that very well could have been the difference between you guys, learning how to work through this together as a team instead of just throwing in the towel. And, it sounds like, again, a whole lot of appreciation for each other and love. And and dedication also was very helpful.
Yeah. One of the things that we did that was really helpful as well, we committed to one another to keep our roles separate, meaning we have our work roles, we have our relationship roles, we have our business owner roles, we have all the others. And so, like, for instance, whenever we communicate about our relationship, we actually have a separate messaging app that we use for that, so that we're not talking about our relationship in and amongst business stuff and in and amongst, kid stuff and like all the stuff. And so we literally created these channels of separation so that even when we were in the most intense relationship struggles, we could still go, okay, I'm taking off the relationship hat and I'm putting on the work hat, and we're going to be in work mode. And it was hard and challenging, but so freeing and liberating. And in fact, we've gone through some really intense challenges in our relationship. And at the most extreme of them was when she came to work for me. And I remember like being really worried about that, frankly. But because of the way that we chose to set it up, it meant that for 6 or 8 hours a day, we actually had to be civil to one another. We had to interact. We had to communicate. And then we went home and the work hat went off and the relationship, I believe, opened back up again, right? But that was a massive tool that made a difference for us. And we still practice that to this day.
Yeah, that's great. James, I can't thank you enough for being willing to share all of this. You have a tremendous story, and your dedication to making it happen, and just you're moving this mountain that just, again, unfortunate situation, made some mistakes, bad luck, just a handful of things that just kind of nailed you, but you didn't give up. And you kept fighting, and you're fighting every single day, and you're focused on, being the best, contractor that you can be, the best, business owner that you can be, the best husband. It's so inspiring to see this and to see you, James. Like, seriously, like, thank you for being such, a great leader and leading by example, but helping people realize that being a business owner, being an entrepreneur, it's not easy.
It's not.
It is not easy. But the point is that no matter what gets thrown your way, you can persevere. You can overcome it. You can keep fighting. And that's what it takes. That is the difference between successful entrepreneurs and everybody else, is that no matter what is thrown at you, you will come up with a way to work towards overcoming it. And, I've seen it for years now from you. And I think that, you're a great example to everybody else. Again, I know you're now a coach in the contractor fight and in battleground, helping other people, being able to be successful and hopefully avoid some of these mistakes. Again, like you had no intention of just running up a huge, credit card bill or debt or over purchasing, crazy, toys and fancy things. Like I've seen that too.
Mm-hmm.
You were genuinely, you're genuinely just trying to build a great business, and you got caught up. And these are simple things that other contractors need to understand, why it's so important that you have systems and processes, and you focus on documentation, and again, just being an upfront, transparent, honest contractor is how you will, hopefully avoid, these huge, losses that you took.
Yeah. Well, and you shared some of your story at the Job Trade Connect user conference, just a week or so ago. And, based on your story, like you've done similar things, right? You've taken what should have been a setback, what may have completely derailed somebody else. And you went, holy crap, if I step into this space, and now you've built this great program that, is a game changer for the industry. Like, I'm excited to know you too. I mean, it's awesome. And I said this, and I've said it many times, and I will, I'm sure, continue to say it, but all the effort, all the money, all the energy, all the sleepless nights, all the tears, all the anger, all the frustration, all the relationship challenges, all of the, what am I going to do? All of the hard conversations, every bit of it, Eric. If I was the only person that benefited from it, it was still worth it. It was. And the fact that now I get to share and help others with that is like so fulfilling and gratifying for me. It's just amazing. And this phrase that I've heard more than once, I just love: your mess becomes your message, right? And the bigger the mess, the bigger the message. And you and I both have had some messes that we've gotten to turn into our message. And I think that's just freaking brilliant.
Well, man, are you open to people reaching out if they want to connect with you? Like what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
That's a great question. Probably the best way would be Facebook Messenger if they happen to have it. If not, you can catch us on yu.coach or at my company website, which is Valiant, VALIANT, I realize that that's sort of the sales funnel, but you'll reach me that way. And there's no pressure on the sales funnel. Just I'm open to conversations. Facebook Messenger is a good way if they happen to have it. So I'm not going to give out my cell phone number just yet.
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure kind of how, like you and your wife have created kind of a coaching program as well. Like, would you like to share about that? And is that something that,
Sure.
You'd be open to having if people have kind of more of a kind of the life coaching that they're looking for? Cause again, I think you're such a great example for people to learn from. I'd love to throw that out there too.
Yeah. So it's called U University, and it's a play on words. Why you, right? Why you? Well, because you're worth it. That's why. But we've been building out curriculum for a couple of years. We do weekly Zoom calls, and we take people down a path that starts with being aware of like what's actually happening, right? So many people just go through life with no clue of why they behave the way they behave. They don't understand their subconscious motivators, their patterns, their conditioning. We help them to see that. We help them to draw it out. We help them to like decide whether they want that to be their reality or they want something else to be their reality. And as I mentioned in our pre-conversation, like we've had some really good results for people. We also have a self-guided course that's available that kind of gets the people that are sort of just getting started, that don't even really know how, kind of guides through how you actually connect with yourself, how you gain awareness around those things. It's been really, really great. We are currently building out more curriculum, and we've actually got a few of our students that are going into like the third year. And so we're actually creating more curriculum around that. So YU is the overarching, but the end result, what we hope to get to with people is IU, which is inspire you. And that is where those people get to then ripple effect their impact to their community, to their people around them, who then get to impact others. And so again, it's a little cocky, but it feels like it could be a movement, and I'm just one small part of that.
Oh man, that's great. And again, people, should take the time to invest in themselves and invest in the relationships that they have, and to make sure that you've got a very strong, core inside of you. But those people, those family, those close, business leaders, those people that are, helping you every single day, invest in that and help, level yourself up and level your team up, because that's how you all can be even more happy, more successful, and be able to grow your businesses, grow your personal and family relationships. So it's so important. James, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of this. It means a lot to me. Again, you have inspired me more times than I think you'll ever know. But I have appreciated the relationship that we've been able to build. And I thank you for sharing this with the Job Tread community and all of our Builder Story, audience out there. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure, Eric. I hope that it really brings value to someone, and happy to offer insight whenever. So,
all right. Have a good one, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.